So today we are going to start off with that first example in 2.5, the notes, where we broke it down into two different investments, and we were trying to look at how you can possibly tell which investment was better. Now, both of these had very similar interest rates, but very different compounding periods, and there was so much different information that we couldn't actually tell which one was the better investment to go for. Now, we talked about or introduced the concept of rate of return. Now, rate of return has the formula as shown here. There's different ways of representing this formula, but this one here is my personal favorite because it's the one that I can visualize and kind of understand the best. Now, rate of return is equal to that dollar amount of interest that I earned on that investment. It's the difference between what I end up with and what I actually put into it. All of that extra money, all of that difference is my numerator. That's the dollar amount of interest I have earned. The denominator is how much of my own money did I actually put into that investment. And then I do that division and I multiply by 100%. Now, to figure out that denominator and that numerator, I've kind of broken it down for us so that this is our true and tested, no matter what happens, worked way that I could use TVM to help me figure out my rate of return. Now, if I have simple interest, then figuring out my numerator and my denominator is going to be a lot easier. In my simple interest formula, oops, that's a highlighter. In my simple interest formula, the top is just my I value, and the bottom is just my P value. And that's really, really easy to do, no biggie. But with TVM, it's a little bit more complex. So here's our true and tested way that will always get those values. I like to look at the denominator first because I do need to use that denominator to help me later calculate the numerator. So let's look at the total amount of money I've invested. Now, for any investment, my total amount investment will be that positive PV value. Now, remember, it's only negative because I need to tell my calculator what direction that money is traveling. So for calculation's sake, I'm always using that positive value. So that PV can be thousands of dollars. It could be $0, but I am including it here. Then I need to account for any money that I invest repeatedly, any sort of payments I'm making. Now, to do that, I take whatever my PMT value is going to be. Of course, it's positive. And I multiply it by N, the total number of times I'm making that payment. If I go ahead and plug in all of my numbers into this kind of made-up, sure-fired formula, I will always be able to calculate my amount invested because it's how much I invest all at once plus how much I invest over time. All right, to find the amount of interest, my numerator, dollar amount of interest that I've earned on that investment, I am simply going to take my final value, whatever I get with my TVM, and I'm going to subtract my total invested. Now, sometimes my total invested happens to be the same as PV. It is just not always the same as PV. So I always do this calculation first because I need that number to figure out my dollar amount worth of interest. So that is going to be our strategy when we take a look at example 1 of 2.5 from the note. So I'm going to shrink this down, bloop, and bring it down to kind of give myself a little bit of a thought bubble to refer to. I'll maybe make it a different color so it doesn't blend in. Oh yes, green will be nice. And I'm going to take a look. Now, we've already done the calculations in class for how much each of those investments will be worth over time to find those FVs. What I really want to do is focus on what my rate of return would be for each of these calculations. Because finding those rate of returns, because both of these investments are over a 3-year period, will allow me to directly compare and say which one is in fact better. So let's get to it. My first one for investment one, I want to find out that rate of return. I need to know my denominator, my total amount invested, and I'm going to follow that formula we talked about, the total dollar invested. Now, that is equal to my PV value as a positive plus whatever my PMT is times by N. Now, I'm pretty lucky in this case because all I have is a PV value, again, positive. My PMT happens to be 0, and that's okay. My N happens to be, 3. Because I have no payments going on, I'm going to put my equal signs over here instead. Because I have no payments going on, it's not going to affect my final answer. And it just happens to be the same as that $52,000. Now, I'm not expecting you to show me this calculation, but I'm just showing you that it'll always work even if I don't have a available PMT. Now, I want to take a look at my dollar amount of interest earned. And we said the dollar amount of interest earned is going to be my FV subtract my total amount of money invested. So, in this case, we have that $54,858.85, and I'm subtracting that $52,000 from it, from that previous calculation we did. When I go ahead and do that, I'm going to end up with $2,858.85. All right, so now I have my denominator value and my numerator value all ready to go that I can plug into my rate of return formula. Little did I know that this would be in my way. Boop, boop. Here we are. All right, so rate of return is going to be that dollar amount of interest, that 2,858.85 all over that 52,000. And of course, I'm going to multiply that quotient by 100%. Now, that 100% is really important that it's a percent because those units are crucial. Those units don't cancel out with anything else, which means I need to represent those units in my final answer. Now, this is what I get when I plug this into my calculator. Hopefully I didn't make any plug-in mistakes, but it looks good to me. And when I round to 2 decimal places, that's about 5.50%. So my rate of return for that first investment is 5.50%. Now I'm going to do the same calculation for rate of return on that second investment. If my rate of return is higher than 5.50%, it's a better investment. If it's lower, then it's going to be a worse investment. But I'm going to follow the steps in the same way. So let's start out with my total invested. My total invested is calculated in the exact same way. I take my PV and I add it to the value of PMT times by N. Of course, both of those numbers are positive. In this case, my PV, I had an initial deposit of $450. And then I invested $25, a total of 36 times, because N represents the total number of payments. When I do that multiplication, 25 times 36, I get 900. And of course, I can add that now to my 450, and I find out that I've originally invested $1,350 as a grand total over those 3 years. Now, when I'm taking a look at my dollar amount of interest earned, I'm following those same steps, my future value, my final amount, subtracting my total dollars, not a really good dollar sign, dollars, invested. And I take those values from my question. So I had 1396.24 minus 1350. And when I do that, I get 46.24. Same idea as before. This first value we calculated was our denominator. The second value we calculated was the value for our numerator. We could go ahead and plug in my rate of return values to actually make that calculation. The numerator is 46.24. The denominator is 1350. And I'm multiplying that quotient by 100%. So I've got 46.24. I divide by 1350. Multiply by 100%, and I get a rate of return of 3.425185185%, or rounded to 2 decimals, 3.43%. Now, before it was a little bit hard to tell which investment had the better or was better. Of course, we can't just compare it by the money because it's not about how much money I end up with. It's about the growth of that amount of money. How much bigger is it going up by? What's the return I'm getting on that money I'm investing? Now, when I take a look at this return of 5.5 is higher than 3.43. So the better investment in this particular case is investment 1. Woo! And that is it. So hopefully that all made sense. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!